Thank you. Thank you, Dave. And also thank you to Laura Smith, who was the first one that suggested or approached me about doing this a couple years ago. So finally we're here. And welcome to my friends and colleagues and fellow photographers. I really am used to being on the other side of the camera, so I'm humbled to be here giving this talk today. Photography and science have long been linked. And just as important, photography has been used to shape the way we see the world. And it can act as an interface between the sciences and the public. So as I go through my photographs today and talk about the stories, I hope to show you how photography can tell the story of your program and the science and technology of the Navy and Marine Corps. And also, as I talk about the photos and my approach, maybe give you a sense of what elements make up a good photograph. So I've been here 14 years, but this is the first photograph I took for the Office of Naval Research. This is in 2001 during Fleet Week. And prior to me starting here, O&R did not have a full-time photographer, so they relied on the active and reserve Navy component to tell their story. And when I got a call from the PAO asking if I was available to come to New York and shoot aerials of the afloat lab passing the Statue of Liberty, I said, sure, why not? Well, you can see the weather grounded that helicopter, but the 6 hours I got to spend on the police boat waiting for this one photo, I got to spend a lot of time talking with a few of O&R's public affairs staff, and learned a whole bunch about the command, a command that I had not been familiar with up until that time. Then 3 years later, again, before I started at O&R, PAO called me and said, would you be interested in documenting a 3-week expedition, the hunt for the USS Alligator? USS Alligator was, as you can read, was the Navy's first submarine, and it sank off the coast of North Carolina in 1863. So O&R, along with NOAA, put together a joint expedition to find this submarine. So I found myself back aboard the afloat lab, and I knew this was a story. This had history, it had science, it was very compelling. But what I didn't realize when I had visions of Bob Ballard discovering the Titanic and all this exciting days at sea was that it really is grad students and researchers staring at screens 24 hours a day. In a small space, there is not a whole lot of photographic opportunities. It is punctuated by some activity in the morning and the afternoon, normally when they deploy and retrieve gear. Or in this case, I spent 8 hours aboard a chartered 40-foot fishing boat while these engineers from Panama City, Florida, threw a Remus unit over the side. That took about 5 seconds to do, and it sunk, and it went on and did great things. Didn't find the alligator, but it did great things. But that's sometimes what you have to do. But there was one photo from this assignment that I think captures it and tells the full story, and that was this one. And I think it's the alligator that's on the counter, and just that anticipation. Yes, they're looking at a screen, but it's like they're almost about to discover something. And I've run into Amir, who's the scientist closest to us. He's now out at Newark Keyport, and he showed me just 2 years ago a website that was still using this photo as their lead image. So that was the job that convinced me to come to work for O&R, which I did in January of 2005. And 3 days later, I was in Whidbey Island to photograph the christening of X-Craft. And you've heard the expression, you have one job, and one job to me during a christening was to capture the breaking of the bottle on the keel, on the hull. I had never photographed a christening in all the years in the Navy, but I figured, how hard can it be? Well, I missed it. And what I didn't anticipate was it would take Mrs. Hunter 8 whacks to break that bottle. And my digital camera buffer filled up after the third whack, and then that was it. I was just watching until I got this reaction shot. But I was not fired, and I did go on most of the next 2 years off and on photographing X-Craft. This is arriving in San Diego for its commissioning, where it became Sea Fighter. It's, to this day, the largest O&R logo I've ever seen. And if you knew Admiral Cohen, that wouldn't surprise you, that branding. But branding's important, and you'll see that throughout my talk today. So I had 40 minutes in a chartered helicopter to get all kinds of aerials, shot some wide stuff. But this is the shot that tells the story, or to me tells a story. This is the frigate USS Rents heading out to sea past Point Loma, while the newest ship in the fleet at that time, Sea Fighter, was coming back in. Sort of out with the old, in with the new. And there was a documentary made about X-Craft, and the only thing that Discovery Channel was not able to film was the helo certification, the initial landings of helicopters. But NavAir said if O&R filmed it, Discovery, and it was cleared for public release, Discovery could use it in the documentary. So a lot of times here, I'm asked to do both video and still. But there's normally one is weighted heavier than the other. In this case, I was a little nervous because I knew everything I shot could be in this documentary. So I really concentrated on video during that assignment. And I've shot all kinds of landings and everything else. But on the last day, I convinced them I needed to be in a rib boat to get some of the shots, video of it landing from the ocean. And they did 10 landings. And on the very last one, I finally pulled out my still camera and I just took one picture. Well, I took 10 pictures, but this one photo, which isn't the greatest, but when you know, this is the photo that ended up in Jane's fighting ships for the 2 years that Sea Fighter was on active service in the Navy. This brings me to Robo Lobster. From the time I had started at O&R, I had been hearing about Robo Lobster, and I was fascinated by this thing, and I really wanted to take some photos. So I was given the assignment to go up to Nahant, Massachusetts, and photograph it. So I took an early morning flight, went to Boston, drove the hour and a half or so to Nahant to Northeastern University's Marine Science Center to meet with Joe Ayers, who was the principal investigator and the inventor. And this is the first picture I took when I finally got there and after Joe showed me around his lab. And it's all right. But walking in, I had seen a beach area with these big boulders and the surf coming in. And I knew that's really where I wanted to photograph Robo Lobster. But Joe convinced me that we should go to lunch first. And that was a mistake because Tom knows Joe. Joe can talk. And Joe knows everyone and everyone knows Joe. So we went to lunch, an hour, it's turning into almost 2 hours, and I'm looking at my watch and I'm thinking, I've got a flight. I haven't really taken a picture yet that I think is going to be worth anything. We finally get back to the lab and something's changed. The tides come in. Most of the beach is now gone. Those rocks that I wanted to shoot on are underwater or half underwater. So I quickly grabbed the lobster. We went outside and I took this photo, which is all right, but it's too busy. You can't, it doesn't jump off the page or the screen. But then I saw this one little patch of sand. I placed 2 Robo Lobsters there. And to this day, this is probably one of my most published photos. I still see this thing pop up. In fact, it's my only photo that appeared in National Geographic, the Japanese version, but I'll take it. And it was used real big at the Smithsonian's Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York when Robo Lobster was made part of the design triennial. And I just have to show you that the thing does walk, in case you didn't believe it. One of the other unique things that, since I've been here for 14 years, I've had the opportunity to see technologies over the years. Sometimes the same technology as it grows and matures to transition, and sometimes just iterations of technology. This is the future immersion training environment or fight out in Camp Pendleton, California. And it's an indoor facility that has the sights and sounds and allows Marines to train before they deploy. But one of the unique things that O&R added to this was the holograms that they could interact with, either in a threatening way or non-threatening way, so that they could better make decisions when they went over there. And then 2 years later, I was back in Camp Pendleton. I'm sorry, that was the infantry immersion trainer. This is the fight. Back over there, and this time they're using VR goggles to demonstrate small squad tactics. And this is a tight shot, and I liked it. I liked the blue in the eye. I think that added some interest. But then this wider shot really shows what that training was about. It shows this squad of Marines in their little box. They use a joystick on their weapon to move around in an environment. And as they look around, they'll see each other. They can talk to each other. They can walk around a simulated village. And then 2 years after that, in North Carolina, here's the same technology, only now it's being used being used. And I don't often shoot with a wide-angle lens, but in this case, I did, or a fisheye in this case, because I really wanted to bring you, the viewer, into the action and give you a sense of that you were there with them, and that just because it's VR, they get a sense after a while that they are in that environment too. You can just see by their stance. And then this will come, Jason, this is the first time you've seen this. This is just last week down in Chesapeake, Virginia. This is at the Center for Security Forces, and only this time, these sailors are wearing combined augmented and virtual reality goggles. So they're in just an open room, and they are seeing trucks, crates, and as they're going around, they're moving around them. They have the opportunity to interact with protesters or with a hostile force. They can see when they shoot. They get the feedback on the weapon, and they can actually see the round. And I'm a sucker for an O&R logo, and I'm a sucker for red, white, and blue. So this photo tells a story. Again, this is Railgun in 2008, the Electromagnetic Railgun. And not only do I get to photograph technologies as they move through the years, sometimes just because of where I work, I'm the only photographer with access to document a certain piece of technology. And I really take that seriously and try to be as accurate as I can. And this is the first time the public was able to see what the electromagnetic railgun looked like, in this case, a lab launcher. And it's just a very simple industrial type shot. Now, this photo I'm often credited with. However, I obviously did not take this picture, or I wouldn't be here today. I rely a lot on other photographers when I'm at labs. In this case, the incredible technical photographers at Dahlgren who can do high-speed photography like this, and then just let me look at it and grab one still frame out of the whole thing. And then I've gone over on throughout the years to continue to document Railgun, all the different versions. This one is probably more of an ad for General Atomics than for O&R. Right up until what it looks like today. This is from early last year. And then just something different, climbing up on top of it, as looking down the barrel as it looks out over the Chesapeake. So I've included this photo of the Ultra Armored Patrol Vehicle for one reason. It's not a great photograph, anyone in this room with their cell phone could take this photo or a better photograph. But what I was still trying to figure out in 2005 when I took this photo at Quantico was, where are my photos going to be used? Who cares? How does this connect with the public? And then this photo that appeared in Rolling Stone magazine started to make sense. I said, a whole bunch of people want to see the work that we do here. And if this can be published, this simple photo can be published in Rolling Stone, then maybe I'm on to something. And then a few years later, out in Carson City, Nevada, with the combat tactical vehicle, I wanted to do something much different than that first photo, spend much more time with it. So this is one of the first photos I took of it as it's making its rounds on the track. And then another photo that when it's showing it with some of the current inventory, a current Humvee and some trucks. So you start to get the sense of that old and new again. But it wasn't until the next day that we went out to this. Now, this looks like Afghanistan. The sand, the mountains, and could really start to get some photos that put this in an environment of where it would potentially operate. And then this photo showing the old and the new. And this is the one that I think tells the story the best. One of the neatest assignments I've had here was to photograph the launch of TACSAT-4 in Kodiak, Alaska. And you have to think, when the NRLPAO called our PAO and said, hey, can you send John up to Kodiak, that it's taking a risk. Kodiak, it takes at least a full day to get there. It's 3 flights. Weather is unpredictable in Alaska. And the launch window was Tuesday with a backup Thursday and then not again for 2 weeks. So if I didn't get that photo, and by the way, I'd never photographed a rocket launch before, but if I didn't get that photo, it was just taking a risk. But they sent me, and I got up there late on Sunday, but immediately went to the facility and started looking around, getting a tour, talking to security, talking to the public affairs staff, just to get a sense, talking to a few other photographers, hey, how do you shoot a rocket launch? What settings are you going to use? Just, and I started piecing it together, did a little searching on the web about shooting shuttles and stuff, so figured I had a better than average chance. But it was important that I was there at least that day early. We had to report to the launch facility at 1 a.m. for an 8 a.m. launch, and they shut it down. So I was photographing from a similar position to this, about 3 miles away, was where I was able to shoot from. But at about 3:30 in the morning, we were allowed to put some cameras on the launch pad, some remote cameras. So I had put a regular DSLR camera, mounted it to a railing with a sound trigger, so that would, as soon as the rocket launched, it would go. But I had a first-generation GoPro with me. And I had never, and back then there was no way to see what that GoPro was seeing, just had to kind of aim it. And the best I could get, though, was 2.5 hours of battery life. So I had gone to Walmart the night before, and I bought big external battery pack, and I wired it into the camera, and I gaffer taped it all together, put it on an old tripod, and stuck it in the mud off to the side, and set it to shoot a photo every 30 seconds, hoping to at least get a time lapse. Here's the entire shoot from that. 24 photos in about 4 seconds. That's it. Rocket's gone. But I was able to get the photograph. And because I had been there a day early and met with security and met with public affairs, here's a second photo. This one, I did not public release this one. It just looks like it's a disaster. It's too reminiscent of the Challenger, although that's what rocket launches look like. That's the rocket, that little bright dot there. But they were immediately transmitted, and they started appearing in newspapers around Alaska, back on the East Coast on the Navy's website. And then about 10:30, they said, okay, you can all go down and retrieve your cameras from the launch pad. So I went down and I went to the DSLR first, and I looked, and nothing. It had triggered, but what I didn't anticipate, or none of the photographers had anticipated, it was a cold morning. It wasn't freezing, but it was cold. And soon as the rocket launched, it fogged all the cameras. So no one got photos. But I went over to my little GoPro, and I grabbed it, didn't have much hope, but went back and downloaded the photos, and actually got one image within that 30 seconds of the rocket launching. And that's the photo that Fox used when I transmitted that. So this, I see Paul in here, this is large vessel interface lift-on, lift-off crane. And I like this shot. It's the second largest sticker I've ever seen at O&R. Thanks, Paul. But it's when I started to get a sense of X-Craft was big, but that was a ship. That's going to be big. This is where I really started to get a sense of how big some of these projects are that we do here at O&R. And I had seen this as a model up at Oceaneering, a small scale, and to see this down in Norfolk aboard the Flickr tail state as it was lifting Connex boxes off, it's designed to be operated in heavy sea state. I just thought, this is really, really something different. This was a Office of Naval Research Tech Solutions project, a program Tech Solutions that directly allows Marines and sailors to give input and do some fast turnaround S&T. And this is aboard the USS Truman, and it's the Catapult Selector valve calculator. And the way sailors were launching aircraft off the decks, they have to first calculate how much steam it takes. And they were doing that with paper charts, looking over a sailor, calling down below decks. In all kinds of weather they had to do this. Well, this was a calculator that replaced this big book of weights and everything for aircraft. So I liked this shot. It gives a sense of urgency on a flight deck. It's a little chaotic. It's cold, yet this shooter here, the shooters are the ones that launched the aircraft. He's still able to operate it even with gloves. But it was this photograph that I think pulled it all together. It shows the whole process in one photo. It shows the new, the existing, and then an aircraft about to be launched from the flight deck. So telling a story in one photo is something I always strive for, if possible. And some of you may remember this technology, Blue Shark. It was located in the back of the Fran Rothwell room, and I was coming up here to photograph a whole nother event in this room, and I saw it, and Jim Blissay, who was one of the project managers on it, was giving a demo to this Marine colonel from Quantico. And I liked the blue light. Nothing says science like blue light. And I just thought it made a good photo, so I took half a dozen or so photos and then came in here and shot the event. Well, that afternoon, as I processed the imagery and went to get the photos publicly released, I included this one, and we released it. And sometimes, with no anticipation other than it's a nice photo, but it went viral. And what the tech media picked up on that none of us really considered at the time was the Oculus Rift goggles. And they had not been released to the public. And it says Oculus on the side. So I think this quote kind of sums it all up. And it made us look really cutting edge in technology. And then here's that same technology, only now it's transitioned out at what was then SPAWAR, San Diego, in the Battle Space Exploitation Mixed Reality Lab, Beamer. This is over at the David Taylor Model Basin at Carter Rock. And the project was Wave Slam. It was testing the pressure on a hull as a hull goes through water. And this is a really neat location over there if you've never been there. It's very unique. And they're able to use a sled to travel like a quarter mile, or is it about a quarter mile down this basin. And I got to ride it twice. And my goal was, it's dark in there, but my goal was to stop the action but also leave enough motion so you got a sense that something was happening more than just a static shot. And Carter ended up using it on their cover of their Waves magazine. The power of a single image. So this is in North Carolina, and for an assignment on IED Detector Dogs. These Labradors are being trained to detect IEDs, and then they're paired with a Marine and sent over at the time to Iraq. And I have all kinds of cute pictures of dogs from that day as they're sniffing the ground and they're finding these test targets. But I really had nothing that was connecting it to the Marine Corps. And I finally saw this photograph of the Marine handler with his dog. This is Grady, with Grady. And I started taking a few pictures, and Grady kindly turned his head right into the light, and I think I made a photo. And while it still doesn't say IED Detector Dog, I think if you can just take a compelling photo and people either see it cute or they're just curious and they read the caption or read one of our stories, then they find out that it's what's going on. Or sometimes the photos used to talk about service dogs to treat health issues that showed up in my Facebook feed a couple years ago. But once the photos are out there, they're out there. This is a case where I wanted to tell the story in one photo, but I couldn't. This is in Pearl Harbor aboard the USS Michael Murphy for a synthetic training exercise. And this allows multiple locations to see the same virtual picture, and in this case, repel an enemy. This was probably the photo, I think, that told the story the best, but it was really this flight crew over on Ford Island who were flying over that ship, and they're seeing it virtually. Or in the CIC Below Decks, they're seeing it on their radars. And then a simulated carrier command center overseeing the whole operation. This was Ford Island. It could be 1,000 miles away. So sometimes it's hard to do everything in just one photograph. So what's going on here? There's a shower on the ceiling, a toilet on the floor, 2 sinks, and you look out the porthole. Well, there's been a few bucket list assignments when I started at O&R, and covering the floating instrument platform, or FLIP, was one of them. And I finally had the opportunity in 2012 during its 50th anniversary to go out there and photograph it. The only problem is you have to make a decision. It's only going to flip once. Do I ride a board flip, which is what I really wanted to do, or do I realize the better photos for me are going to be on a chase boat? So this is how it looks when it's being towed out to sea. Here's a short video clip that at the end showing it transitioning. You will see I did have a GoPro aboard that I convinced a lieutenant to start for me when they did the transition. And then there was this photo that I made that I really liked from the day. So in the end, I'm glad I chose to ride the... So Tim, if I ever can get back out to flip. They're waiting. So this is Octavia. Octavia is a mobile, dexterous, social robot. And it uses expressions so that when a sailor or someone approaches the robot in a panic situation like a fire, they're not afraid.
I'm just afraid of Octavia.
So my goal in this photo was to shoot it as if it was a person, just a nice environmental portrait. According to Gizmodo, it's the Navy's creepiest robot that just may save your life. And as an aside, it's the only photo I was asked to move from the command suite to another location because they didn't want it looking at them. And then this is safer. So this is a shipboard firefighting robot. And now we're getting more, this is just starting to look really cool. And this is aboard the ex-USS Shadwell in Mobile, Alabama, where they were doing a demo to actually have this robot walk on a ship, fight a fire. But you can see it is walking on its own, but it's tethered to the ceiling for safety purposes. So while I didn't alter the photo, I did shoot it in such a way to crop it so that it wasn't that obvious at that time what it was doing. And I just called, this is just, I had a few minutes that I could actually put some light on it and do one portrait. And that's how it appeared in Discover. But then a few years later, during the DARPA Robotics Challenge, was able to engage with Safer again, a slightly upgraded version. But this took place in Pomona, California, and it was an event at the racetrack. Thousands of people came to this to watch these robots do what they do, these challenges. And this is the team from Virginia Tech setting up the robot. And I liked this shot, but I put it here for one reason, to set up this next shot, which I turned and from below shot up and captured Tom McKenna, who's the program manager, and Brian Latimer, who's was the head at the time of the Virginia Tech lab where the robot was being built. And this shows you that Safer can actually walk. It walked that entire course. I think it even surprised the team from Virginia Tech, the grad students, when it made it to the end. But there were all kinds of robots there doing the tasks. And but it was this shot that I liked because it just gave a whole sense of what one of these little vignettes looked like. And a team from MIT, they're watching their entry compete. Gives a sense of place. You have the mountains and the palm trees. So it's just kind of odd. What's going on here? From the time I started at O&R, the most requested photos I get asked for are of people in laboratories. And they say, well, just go photograph laboratories. Well, we don't have any laboratories here in this building, as you know. And many times when I'm off with doing a tour of a laboratory with a program manager, for some reason they send everyone home, the grad students or who's ever doing, and they just want to show the technology or what they're working on. But I finally had an opportunity a few years ago as working on a video project talking about historically black colleges and universities, and I was able to go over to NRL to film these interns in the chemistry lab. And when I was done filming, I made sure I had about half an hour to take some still photographs. And these photos have been used over and over and over again. So if anyone has any labs that they can get me into, I'm happy to do that and get some new photography from there. This is the laser weapons system aboard the USS Ponce in the Arabian Gulf. And this job almost didn't happen for the simple reason that it wasn't hard to get me to Bahrain or have me walk aboard the ship and get underway. And I was with NAVC and O&R, and they wanted me to film it and photograph it. But myself and my equipment represented 2.5 people. And that only becomes a problem when you have to helo off. And my boss was not going to let me spend 5 weeks underway so I could walk off. I was given five days, 4 nights. So I had to consolidate stuff. I got myself down to 2 people, and I got manifested on the flight off. But this is another case where you think you have unlimited time. You're there all day in the middle of, in this case, the Gulf, and just to photograph. But with testing, you just can't go anywhere you want. You can't always be outside when they're lasing, so you just have to wait and always be ready. But this is a shot I liked. It has the American flag. It's the one the Washington Post used. But I really wanted a photo from the perspective of the laser looking out. And I just couldn't get it. Well, the night before the final night at sea, I talked to the second class petty officer who I knew prepared the laser every morning. He opened up the garage, he cleaned it, checked some settings. So I said, what time are you going to do that tomorrow? And he told me 0630. So I was out there at 0530, and sure enough, at 0600, he's already working on this thing. But I was able to work my way up and get the final shot that which was my favorite from that assignment. Like Flip, the Navy had an airship in Pax River, a blimp. It's not a blimp, it's an airship. You get corrected right away when you call it a blimp. But this was something that I knew that I wanted to ride in. But again, my first trip there, I chose to not ride in it and get photos of it from afar. This is part of NRL's VSX squadron. But then I had another opportunity, a second chance to go down. This time, I was set. I'm going to ride in an airship. Except when I got there, my name had been left off the manifest. And the old Navy, where you could just jump on an aircraft and go, it's not like that anymore. So I had to watch it leave, and I took some more pictures. So third time's a charm, right? I'm going down there for a third time. I confirmed with the front office that I was on the manifest, and I was going to finally ride in the airship. Well, I get down there, and I go over to the airship, and I notice all the seats have been removed for scientific gear except for 4. So unless I was going to bump the admiral, the pilot, Larry Schutte, or the program manager, I was once again not going to ride in the airship. But that's all right, because now I had a new GoPro, one that you could operate from your phone. So I mounted the GoPro in there, and I took pictures of their whole trip while they were flying around until it was out of range. This photo I would never have been able to get if I had actually been able to ride in the blimp. So some things work out. Many years later, I'm in Anacortes, Washington for the christening of the research vessel Armstrong. And this time I made sure I didn't miss. They also did it right. They put a sharp, pointed thing they welded on the side just to break the bottle. And while I was there, I had a chance to photograph the sister ship, which was the Sally Ride, while it was under construction. Then a few months later, I was able to, now I'm getting good at this, so I was able to capture the christening of the Sally Ride. But then fast forward, what was really neat was then the ability to get underway on Sally Ride for a 3-day scientific certification cruise to tell the story of some of the researchers that were there. And when I was out there, I wanted to show the newest tech, some of the things that were different from other research vessels I had been on. And these cranes were purpose-built for that. And I picked this high-angle shot, and I like it. But I thought this one was better. I got low, and this one kind of makes you feel like you're helping them bring this piece of gear in. Or this of the A-frame in the back, large A-frame, as they're retrieving scientific gear. But then one photo that was my favorite from the whole event was this one. And I think, again, like the IED dog or some of the others, if a photo just is interesting to you, I think you're more likely to read the story. And this can talk about women in science. It can talk about STEM. This engineer from Scripps actually operating the crane. And not that I'm showing off now, but this is the christening of Sea Hunter in Portland, Oregon. And I went out to photograph the christening, but I knew this was, at this time, it was still more of a DARPA project than O&R. So that's the director of DARPA that's doing that with Admiral Winters in the photograph. But I took a back seat to this. But the photo I wanted to get that I knew would be much more interesting was something of it underway. At the time, there were no real photos of it, underway. And I was like, well, let's see what I can do. But immediately after the ceremony, I went back in the building and I processed the photos. And I was sending them back to the East Coast to meet the deadline. And I kept asking, when's it getting underway? I knew it was getting underway that day to go back up the river to where it was built. No one would give me an answer, or they didn't know. So my first indication, like a lot of things, was I hear the horn, blast, I look out the window and they're casting off lines. Well, I grab a camera and I run as best I can. Up, I get on, there's a bridge that goes over the Willamette River. And I got as far up as I could as it just pulled away from the pier. And sure enough, that was a photo that the Virginia pilot used to talk about the christening. But this is the photo that I really liked, that I took a few seconds later, and then it was gone. One of the other things that's changed a lot is the ability for me to use remote cameras. In this case, documenting a swarm, an autonomous swarm boat exercise on the James River. So this photo, I was able to get close enough on the main boat to actually show that there's no one aboard this vessel as it's going through. But by mounting a GoPro on there, I'm really able to put you, the viewer, into that boat and really emphasize that it's unmanned. And this magazine agreed. And then 2 years later, off the coast of Little Creek, for another swarm boat, I just did the same thing, only this time I reversed the camera, and that was the photo that, of all the photos sent, these were the photos that were most published. This is the Advanced Electric Ship Demonstrator in Lake Pend Oreille in Idaho. And I'm showing you this photo. I like the photo. It's a beautiful setting. It clearly shows the technology. But sometimes you want to show more than the technology to, again, tell a story or get interest. So this photo of the Australian host of a Discovery Science show being interviewed with the ship in the background perhaps would make you want to read the story more to find out what's going on here. And why is she wearing a coonskin cap? Never solved that. Or this photo that shows an autonomous aerial vehicle or drone taking off from an unmanned utility vehicle after they both exited from an amphibious assault vehicle that autonomously landed on the beach in Camp Pendleton. This is unmanned in like one photo. And now here we have a science advisor who's talking to Marines about what kind of technology they want to see, what do they think of what they just saw, and you have the technology in the ocean in the background. So I think sometimes these photos add a lot more interest than just the technology, and if they're sometimes used together or as a single photograph. Here's another example to your point. This is Robotics, an international maritime competition. This is in Hawaii. And this is the team from Australia, University of Newcastle. And this is just one of the tasks. They had to launch that racquetball to that target. These are all autonomous. So it took a lot of photos to get to actually, because no one knows when it's going to happen. The thing's thinking on its own. But here's the real photo from a competition like that. And this is the team from Embry-Riddle University jumping in to solve a problem that the team from Osaka University in Japan was having. So that international cooperation is really what a lot of these events are ultimately about. And then this photo from the University of Hawaii's entry, just as funny. And in these days of Instagram, you're kind of looking for stuff like this. Or in this case, ACUS, the Autonomous Aerial Cargo Utility System. How do you show a Vietnam-era helo as high tech? Now, that thing's flying autonomously. ACUS can take any rotary wing aircraft and potentially turn it autonomous. So it is neat. But how do you show it? Well, in this case, the Marine, putting the Marine in the photo, he's not flying the helo, but he is determining where it will land by picking a target or a landing zone. But if you take photos like this just shows a Huey landing. It's an all right photo, but it doesn't say high tech. So in this case, I just chose to zoom in on the one thing that was exterior to the helo, the LiDAR unit on the front that mapped everything as it would come in, and chose to use this photo. as the main photo. I've had the opportunity twice to film in the Arctic, and the first one, like a lot of things, sounds very exciting, and it is. But it's also about 13 hours in a C-130 flying over ice that you have to kill time. This is out of Fairbanks, Alaska, and as they were throwing these buoys out, that hit, sonar buoys that would hit and then drop down and send data back to the researchers, or then fly up into the clouds and throw different sensors out. And then I had the opportunity just a couple years ago to go to Thule Air Force Base in Greenland, and for the International Cooperative Engagement for Program for Polar Research, right? Ice paper. So where we were going, the goal was to drop buoys over the North Pole into the ocean to measure oceanographic data. And they stay there for years. They provide data for 3, 4, sometimes 5 years as they freeze and thaw. But anyway, so you get there early and you have a lot of time. So you film the unboxing of the buoys, working on the buoys, preparing them, branding the buoys. That is important. John Woods is an expert at branding. The buoy's ready to be loaded onto a Danish C-130, being loaded, but then ultimately flying over the North Pole, dropping one of the buoys out. And they go really quick once they get out the back of that C-130. But you have to be ready. And then at the same time, I'm shooting video. So again, things like remote cameras can help when you're doing that. And I know the parachute didn't open there, but we were only at 200 feet, and the buoy immediately started transmitting. This is at Unmanned Warrior in Scotland. And sometimes you're in these great locations, but you're inside. So how do you tell that story? In this case, it's obvious with a flag on the wall. It's Captain Beth Crichton, one of the O&R Reserve components, who was the overall US lead for that, and talking with sailors about their technology. Or you see another flag in great light and you just wait for something to happen in front of it, and these UK sailors come by with another Remus unit. But this photo, you're saying, well, what's going on here? And this photo is significant in that the US team on the left is talking with the Australian team lead there in the center, and his units on the right. This was the first time, they're talking about the first time that these two unmanned undersea vehicles communicated and tasked each other. And that's pretty cool. But you would have to read the caption or the story to find that out. And this photo showing the US and Canada with unmanned undersea vehicles, which you obviously can't see, but they're transmitting to this unmanned aerial vehicle that's sending that data back to the shore. And here's the shore base station. Time for an adventure. I can't tell you the number of demos I'm on that U-Haul, Thrifty, everything plays a big role, but it all works. It's all science. And this photo I jokingly call reservist in a box, but that's Lieutenant Chelsea Ware. So how do you show an underwater security system? And even if I was to put a wetsuit on and dive down to the bottom of the lock, I would see a cable. It still wouldn't tell a story. But seeing Chelsea in this container monitoring that system, I think is an interesting enough photo that you might want to read more about that technology. Sometimes, these next two photos, sometimes video does a good job, sometimes still. This is Locust, aerial swarming technology, aboard Sea Fighter, only this time in the Gulf of Mexico. And this photo, sure enough, shows a Coyote air vehicle being launched. But what you really want to convey is what's truly happening during that. And that's this multiple launch to generate this swarm. So I chose to do a composite. So this is 7 photographs combined into one to tell that story. And you asked earlier about manipulation, and so again, Department of Defense does allow the use of composites as long as it's clearly stated in the caption that it's an illustration, that you're not doing it to mislead. But I think it tells the story. Or this Navigator. This is really cool. But no matter how many times I took still photos of it, I just could not show what it really did, which is go below the surface, then fly back up, out. And this was shot on the iPhone 6. So anyone in here could do it. Please, if you're going to shoot video, hold your phone this way and not this way. But this was used on social media and got thousands of views. So this leads to this photo. So this is Bobby Junker. We're here in the Bobby Junker Conference Center, and this is Bobby giving a PowerPoint brief in Dahlgren, Virginia. And I put the photo in for 2 reasons. One, I think it's the only PowerPoint photo that I saw published on Navy.mil, so I was proud of that. Also, we didn't get a chance to talk a lot about what Bobby's code does. It's not very visual, what they do. It's powerful, but not visual. But also, what I haven't shown you today is all the other photos I take here of people, the awards, the retirements, ceremonies, events, and those photos are as important as any I've shown you today, which leads to this portrait, which is hanging on the dedication plaque for this room. And I was packed up in my office ready to leave for an assignment that afternoon when the editor of our weekly newsletter, Snapshot, came in and said, hey, I need a portrait of Bobby. I said, well, grab his official portrait off the drive. Well, I want something a little better. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, okay. Well, I called Bobby, I called his office, they said, if you can be here in 10 minutes and take the picture, you can. So I unpacked the camera, I went down, I opened up some blinds, some nice light, forced Bobby to put his badge in his pocket, and took half a dozen photos. Bobby just naturally posed against the back of a chair. I didn't think anything of it, and that night when I arrived at the hotel, I downloaded those photos and sent them back to Snapshot and didn't think anything of it. Well, as many of you know, Bobby got ill very quickly and passed away before he could even have an official retirement ceremony. So the code came to me and said, hey, the family would like any photos you have of Bobby. And I had remembered the previous photo. There had been awards photos of Bobby and, of course, his official portrait. But then I came across this photo, too, and I was like, oh, okay. I packaged it all up, sent it to the code, and they provided it to the family. Well, during a memorial service and the dedication of this room, Bobby's wife came up to me and thanked me for capturing Bobby. So again, it's just a constant reminder to me that the photos I take, whatever the assignment, are important to someone. Like this photo of my grandfather's retirement from the Naval Air Development Center in Warminster. And I didn't remember this photo being taken in the mid-70s, but I did remember visiting that lab with my grandfather and seeing where the centrifuge, where our first astronauts trained, and the little model aircraft factories, or model aircraft room. So again, the fact that some Navy photographer took this picture at his retirement it hangs in my office, again, as a constant reminder. And then if you'll indulge me for a second, I'll take this full circle. This is a patent my grandfather received while he was at the Philadelphia shipyard for a tube bending tool. And it was the early 40s. And again, I didn't know about this, but my grandmother just a few years ago sent me a box, or gave me a box with all these papers in it, and I came across this original patent. I'm like, wow, that's really, really cool. But then there was a letter in there from the Office of Naval Research sent to my grandfather in 1947, sending that final package and the final award of that patent. So this is all the places you can find us. Thank you. Happy to hang out in the back and talk photography.